on this computer. All right, now we get all started off in Jeremiah 19. Appreciate that prayer again, brother. Because like I said, it's one of those things. One of the reasons why I love studying this book is I see a preacher that's discouraged. I see a prophet that just wants to give up, and I just he becomes my hero in one sense, that he just keeps on hanging in there no matter what. And that's a lesson, I think, for all of us constantly that we've got to keep in our minds, because there's a lot of things in this world today that's discouraging us as preachers and elders and so forth. And we just need to buckle down and say, okay, Lord, I don't understand why all this is going on the way it's going, but at the same time, help me to be like Jeremiah and hang in there no matter what. And again, I've loved the idea that Jeremiah is honest about how he feels. We're going to really talk about this in chapter 21 a little bit more, chapter 20, 21. And after we see this, it's hopefully will give us even that much more encouragement, because we've not yet suffered under blood. In chapter 19, he starts off with a sign of the broken flask. And he's talking about these problems, and he goes out to the potsherd. Now, there was a certain area of the city of Jerusalem where they made pottery. And making pottery again would be involved in getting the clay to the right mixture, making sure it was doing exactly what it needed to do, making sure it was consistent and all the way through there. So again, what we have here is God using this as an object lesson. He goes out by this potsherd gate. He takes some of the elders of the people and some of the elders of the priests. So he's taken the priest as well as the people, as well as himself, to bring them out there. And then he says, I want you to go through to the valley of the son of Hinnom. In just a moment, I'll show you a picture of that. But he's trying to bring out the idea in this chapter as we go through it in that way. He says there's a similarity between the broken, useless vessel and the people of Jerusalem. They were broken. They were useless because they were no longer striving to do what God wanted them to do. And that's the reason why he's going to emphasize verses 4 through 9, the reason why they were being broken. God had in the Old Testament had told them time and time again that if they did not stay faithful to him, he was going to punish them. Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy, I may have mentioned this before, but in Leviticus chapter 26, he emphasizes this idea of, it's kind of like Deuteronomy 32 and following, where he tells us the promise of the blessings and the retributions. And listen to what he says in verse 26 through chapter 26, 23 through 39. I'm not going to read all of it. He said, if by these things you are not reformed by me, but walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you, and I'll punish you 7 times for your sins. I will bring a sword against you that will execute the vengeance of the covenant. When you're gathered together within your cities, I will send pestilence among you. You shall be delivered into the hand of your enemy, and I will cut off your supply of bread. 10 women shall break your bread in one oven, and they shall bring back your bread by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. And then he goes on, and after all this, if you do not obey me, but walk contrary to me, I will walk contrary to you. I will chastise you 7 times for your sins. Now listen to verse 29. He said, you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your high places, cut down your incense altars, cast your carcasses on the lifeless forms of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. I will lay your cities waste, bring your sanctuaries to desolation, bring the land to desolation, scatter you among the nations, and the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate, and you are in the enemy's lands. Now, look, key in on verse 29, you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. You go to 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 28 and 29, it gives a specific example of where they had been actually having to eat their own children because there was nothing left to eat, and they didn't get this. He will stress the idea. Verse 36, those of you who are left, I'll send faint-heartedness send faintness into your hearts in the land of their enemies. They shall stumble one another, or as if they were being pursued by the sword. And he said, you shall not stand, have no power to stand before your enemies. You shall perish among the nations, and those of you who are left shall waste away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands. And so that's exactly what's going on there. So in chapter 26, verses 1 through 39, he says, this is what's going to happen if you don't obey. Verse 40, but if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers, and that I have also walked contrary to them, he said, if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled, then I will remember the covenant of Jacob. And so you see what's interesting is you look at Leviticus, and then you also see the last part of Deuteronomy, where Moses, in his last speech to the people, strives to the best of his ability to get them to see what they need to see. They can't say they weren't warned. And today we think about that idea. We need to continually, consistently preach the word so that people will know what the consequences are if we don't obey. And I think I've mentioned to you once before the idea that we don't hear that many more sermons on hell anymore, because that's not politically correct to teach, but it's still the reality. And I think maybe even something needs to be said more about that. So he goes on in this chapter and he emphasizes this idea. He says, you go out to the valley of the son of Hinnom. This is the picture of the valley of the son of Hinnom. This is where you get the word that is in the Greek, it's called Gehenna. And if you listen to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they argue the fact that this is not hell, but the translators in most of the translations do translate this word Gehenna as being hell. And it portrayed, it was kind of a garbage dump outside the city of Jerusalem. This is where they took all the dead bodies, all the dead animals, all the unburied people for whatever reason, and they would burn them. There would be a foul odor there. There would also be the stink of the animals, dead animals there. So this was all there outside the city of Jerusalem. And that's why a lot of times, that's why the translators translate this word Gehenna to the idea of hell or punishment. So in this particular place, he's going down there to this valley of the son of Hinnom, and he says, hear the word of the Lord, O kings of Judah and inhabitants. Thus says the Lord, I will bring such a catastrophe on this place that whoever hears it, his ears will tingle. They have forsaken me and made this an alien place, because they burned incense to it to other gods, whom neither they nor the Father nor the kings of Judah have known, and have filled this place with the blood of the innocents. I think about the idea as we read through this, they will be punished because they had been killing the innocents. And again, I think about our country today and our killing of the innocents. Mm-hmm. And the idea that God is going to hold us accountable for that, just as he did the people before here. And he says they built high places of Baal to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings to Baal, which I did not command nor speak, nor did it come to my mind. I cannot even begin to imagine how any parent could, in their right mind, be so brainwashed into thinking that this kind of worship is acceptable to even a false god, that you would put a baby and burn the baby alive so that you could worship this god. I can't even begin to imagine where we get in this world, or even in our thinking, that would be acceptable or well-pleasing to any god. And yet that's what they do, and that's what they did. And I think about, again, the abortion situation in our country. I think about the idea as well of how we're sacrificing, in essence, to what? We're sacrificing ourselves on the altar of pleasure. And we're saying, in essence, that our children will have to pay for that, or they will, for my freedom to happen, for my desire for pleasure, I'm going to kill the innocent. And that's where we are in this country. And that's where we've been since 1973. It just flabbergasted me. I mean, it just goes beyond my wildest dreams that anybody could justify that. And that's what was going on back then. And this is part of the reason why God punished them. And if God is righteous, and he is, and punished the people of that day for doing this kind of things, then he is righteous to judge nations today. to do the very same thing. He said, the days are coming. This place shall no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. So this place not only was this garbage dump outside of Jerusalem, and you have there in the picture on the right, that's actually some graves that are there in that valley of the son of Hinnom. And the thing he says, this is where people are going to be slaughtered. The Babylonians were going to bring them out of the city and slaughter them out here in a garbage dump. And he says, I will make void the counsel of Judah and Jerusalem in this place. I will cause them to fall by the sword before their enemies, and by the hands of those who seek their lives, their corpses, I will give as meat for the birds of the heaven and for the beasts of the earth. I mean, nobody's going to be able to pick up all the bodies and bury them all. And again, look in the book of Lamentations, he's going to be very specific about the idea that he's walking through the city where there's a bunch of dead bodies laying around. And he says, everyone who passes will be astonished and hiss because of all of its plagues. And I will cause them to eat the flesh of their son, the flesh of their daughters, and everyone shall eat the flesh of his friends in the siege. So again, you look at this, in the desperation with their enemies, and those who seek their lives shall drive them to despair. So he goes out to this valley of the son of Hinnom, where they're making this pottery, and he says, you shall break the flask. And in essence, he's saying, this is what's going to happen to Judah. Judah shall be broken. And he says, I will break this people. I will break this city as one break a potter's vessel, and it cannot be made whole again. Now, here's a situation where, if the vessel was not fired, in other words, if it was not heated and fired and became hard, you might have the chance to change the clay in some way or another and make it into another form. But here he's talking about your hearts are so hard, and you have become so hard, and you become so hardened against the innocent, you become so hardened against God's will and God's word and God's way, that all that's left to do with you now is to break you, and to literally break you. I'm going to make it like that. And so he came from Topheth, where the Lord had sent him to prophesy, and he stood in the court of the Lord's house and said to all the people, thus says the Lord, I will bring on this city and on all her towns all the doom that I pronounced against it, because they have stiffened their necks, that they may not hear my words. So Jeremiah was prophesying. He's trying to emphasize this idea. And now, beginning in chapter 20 and going through the next few chapters, things start getting very, very serious for the message that Jeremiah is preaching. There was a fellow by the name of Pashur, the son of Immer, the priest, who was also chief governor in the house of the Lord, and he heard that Jeremiah prophesied these things. So Jeremiah had just got finished speaking this last message. We're still talking about 606 BC, somewhere around in that general area. And so he hears Jeremiah prophesy these things, and he gets personally upset about it. And he struck Jeremiah the prophet, put him in the stocks that are in the high gate of Benjamin, which was by the house of the Lord. So now you have the situation where you see Jeremiah now actually beginning to suffer for his preaching. Up till now, he's had people talk about him. He's had people tell him to shut up and be quiet. He's had people to walk away from him. But now things start getting serious. According to some commentaries, this Pashur may very well have been the guard for the temple, and specifically for the priests. He would have been of the priestly tribe, and he would have been, again, the son of Immer, the priest who was the chief governor in the house of the Lord. So this would have been the high priest or the chief governor. So he may have been related to him in some way or another. So his son may very well have been the police force, the enforcers of the law. And when he heard Jeremiah say these things, he put him in the stocks. Now, again, a lot of times when we think about stocks, we think about pictures, movies that have shown people standing with their head and their arms caught. A lot of pictures, if you're looking at this particular picture here on this thing, suggests the idea that they may have been sitting down and seated or put in stocks like this, to where not only could they not move their hands and head, but they also could not move their feet. And again, the way this would be, it would be extremely uncomfortable. And after a period of time, what would happen after that? It would become very painful. Sitting there that long, struggling with all that. Then you have on top of all of that, the shame. Of course, Jeremiah could have argued the fact, I don't need to be ashamed about anything. I'm doing exactly what God wants me to do. As you look at this, he may very well have been beaten. When we think about that phrase there in verse 1, he struck Jeremiah the prophet. Some commentators also suggest he may have been beaten with the 40 stripes save one, because this would have been a normal Jewish punishment at that time and going on from that time. So we often think about it with regards to Jesus whenever he was suffering. We think about it with others. So may very well be he would have been beaten with his 40 stripes save one, and then put in this stocks to give him even that much more of shame and indignity. But again, all he was doing in this situation was preaching the word of the Lord. Think about the idea. This was in the high gate of Benjamin, which was by the house. And so Jeremiah, or the next day, Pastor brought Jeremiah out of the stocks. And Jeremiah said to him, the Lord has not called your name Pastor, but Megor Misabib. Well, now that's phrase, actually, if you're looking in some of the other translations, it means fear on every side. In other words, because of what you've done, you're now going to be looking over your shoulder all the time. And again, it's not a threat from Jeremiah that he's going to punish him. As much as God saw what you did, you need to be concerned about what God is thinking. And so now the people were going to call him, mocking him, terror on every side. And so that's where it goes. And so he says, thus says the Lord, I will make you terror to yourself and to your friends, and they shall fall by the sword of their enemies, and your eyes shall see it. I will give all Judah into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall carry them captive to Babylon and slay them with a sword. And again, this is another opportunity. He's preaching to this Levite, and he said, I will deliver all the wealth of the city, all its produce, all its precious things, all the treasures of the kings of Judah, I will give into the hands of their enemies, who will plunder them, seize them, and carry them to Babylon. And you, Pasher, and all who dwell in your house, you shall go to Babylon, and you shall die there, be buried there, you and all your friends to whom you have prophesied lies. So not only are you going to be having terror on every side, but you shall be taken into captivity. Think also about the idea of how when Nebuchadnezzar took over, he would have gone after all the leaders. He would have definitely gone after the king and the king's court, because they were the leaders of the people. But being part of the priesthood, they would have had a great deal of influence as well. So he probably would have been capturing all the priests and making sure that they didn't lead the children of Israel, or Judah, I should say, into trying to be rebelling against them. So these things that he has said there, he's really telling it like it is. Things are getting worse for Jeremiah, and it's going to continue to get worse. And so then, as we've seen all through this book, God again allows Jeremiah, and what you're reading about here from verses 7 through 18, is you have this complaint, but he also have Jeremiah again coming back to God, as he often does. He has the opportunity to complain, but he also knows that God is with him. He says in verse 7, and this is extremely interesting idea. Lord, you induced me. And the word induced there suggests the idea of enticed me. You persuaded me It's like, I didn't want this job, but you persuaded me, you enticed me. In fact, again, I think you've got to be careful always when you're reading some of these commentaries. But years ago, whenever I was studying this, I came across a commentary that suggested the idea that God forced him. And the way they said it in this particular commentary is kind of like, um, I hesitate to say this, but this is exactly what this commentator suggested, that God forced him like a man would force a woman in a sexual encounter. And so it's kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, you're saying God forced him to do this? You know, I don't ever see God doing that. He's always give people the option here. I don't think that is as far as it needs to go. I think this particular word does suggest the idea that he was persuaded, he was strong. And think about it, you are stronger than I and have prevailed. And I am in derision daily. I'm the laughing stock. Everybody's laughing at me. I've been beaten. I have been in the stocks. Everybody's laughing at me. Think about, again, if you're preaching that message and you get thrown in the stocks by the leadership, what is that saying to all the people that see you in the stocks? Well, the leaders obviously don't agree with his message. And so you don't need to worry about what his message is. They do not treat him with the respect that a prophet deserved. And so he says, when I spoke, I cried out and I shouted violence and plunder, because the word of the Lord was made to me a reproach and a derision daily. The ideal is I kept shouting this message, and now I'm being reproached. People are deriding me. And so he says, I'm not going to preach anymore in his name. I will not speak anymore in his name. I will not make mention of him. Here's a preacher that just wants to quit. I'm tired. I'm catching it on every side. And to be honest, sometimes I don't know what to do. I just want to quit. How many preachers have quit? Do you know any preachers that have quit preaching? I do. And you get to thinking, why? What's going on? Is the pressure that hard? I mean, we've not yet, as Paul would say, you've not yet resisted unto blood, but you know, always being caught in the middle, as it was, always trying to make everybody happy, which is not our job. That's not our job. And I think sometimes I have to be constantly reminded of this. Preachers and elders have to be constant. As preachers and elders, our job is to glorify God, to make sure that his will is done. Now, we have a lot of different opinions about how that ought to be done. And sometimes you get caught in the middle and people get mad and they leave and go somewhere else. And one thing I have noticed about a lot of the folks that go somewhere else, they still take themselves with them. And so wherever they go, they're always going to find something somewhere that's not going to make them happy. I've known of people that have made rounds in the areas that I've preached at. And then they wind up coming back after 4, 5, or 6 years, staying there for a little while until something else makes them mad there again, and they start the rounds again, you know. And that's not changing anything. Obviously, they are so discontent in their hearts and in their lives that they're never going to be happy with anything. That gets discouraging. That gets discouraging. And so sometimes you just want to quit. And he said, that's where Jeremiah is. I'm not going to mention him anymore. I'm not going to say anything more to him. But he said, his word was in my heart like a burning fire, shut up in my bones. I was weary of holding it back, and I could not. So here's a man that wants to quit, but he can't. And that goes back to what he had said earlier in verse 7. You induced me, you're stronger than I, you prevailed. I wanted to quit, but Lord, you wanted your message preached. And Lord, I just need to keep on preaching that message, but Lord, it's hard. It's hard. Because while you're up in heaven, I'm your agent here on this earth. And a lot of times people attack the agents and not the one that sent them on the mission, right? So you look at this, and here's what it is. He says, I'm weary of holding it back. So he's caught literally in the middle between God and the people. He said, I just want to quit preaching. I'm just done. I'm not going to mention him anymore. But that word just kept burning in my heart, and I have to keep on. I have to keep trying. I have to keep doing what God wants me to do. And so as we consider that idea, think about the idea as well, that he keeps on. I hear many mocking, fear on every side. What are they saying about him? They're saying, in essence, all Jeremiah is preaching about is doom and gloom and fear. All that we are hearing out of him is that. And so he said, that's all they're saying. So he says, all my acquaintances watch for my stumbling, saying, perhaps he can be induced. Now, again, this word induced in verse 7 is the same word that he said in verse 10. Again, persuaded or enticed. Perhaps he say we can prevail against him and we'll retake our vengeance on him. We'll get him to shut up one way or another. And so Jeremiah's preaching to the people that don't want to hear the message. God keeps telling him to keep on preaching the message. He wants to give up and quit. And he says, I can't do it because this is what God's message is, and I've got to keep preaching these things. And looking at it from the viewpoint of here and now, that's all he sees. To me, this has been a very, as I restudied this and prepared for this today and earlier, this reminds me, and it should remind all of us that are in leadership positions, that we're not by ourselves. God is with us as long as we're faithfully doing the job that we need to do. We get discouraged because we don't have the same number of baptisms. We get discouraged because people don't seem to care anymore and listen to the word anymore. We've not yet, again, suffered under blood, but just remember, always remember that when we do what God wants, God will be with us. And that's what he says in verse 11. The Lord is with me as a mighty, awesome one. Everybody else is trying to trip me up. Everybody else is trying to laugh at me, mock me because of the message I'm saying, but God is with me, and my persecutors will stumble, and they will be the ones that will not prevail. They will be greatly ashamed. They will not prosper, and their everlasting confusion will never be forgotten. Sometimes we just need to remind ourselves that as long as we're doing what God wants us to do, the others are going to be the ones that are going to be greatly ashamed. At the same time, doesn't that break our hearts? Because they're going down this path that's going to lead to eternal punishment. And that should break our hearts as well. As I look at Jeremiah, I think a lot about Jesus as well. The message Jesus preached was not liked. Nobody liked what he had to say, especially the Sadducees, the Pharisees. And they crucified him. The Jews did not like the message Paul preached. And he winds up giving his life, as do all the apostles, with the possible exception of John. And John has to be put in exile. A great study would be studying through all of the heroes of the Old Testament, Moses, Abraham, and everybody all the way down, and all those that stayed faithful to God, what they had to do whenever they did stay faithful. So he says, the Lord is with me. And we need to sometimes just be reminded of that. And he's not just some vague idea. He is the mighty. He is the awesome one. The New King James Version translates that. He says, so, you know what? God is on my side. They're not going to prevail. Lord, you are the ones who are going to test the righteous. Now, there's a key phrase, to test the righteous. You are the one who tests the righteous. God allows trials to come into our lives to see if we will stay faithful to him. And I think, again, we need to be stressing this to the church. We need to be emphasizing to the church that, yes, you're going to have to suffer for the cause of Christ. But realize that the tests come to help us to see where we are, to see our weaknesses, to see our faults, to see our struggles, and also help us to see that we need the test to build us and make us stronger. And that, again, is something that I've shared with you before when we're talking about physical bodybuilding. You have to constantly tear the muscles down to bring them back up, to make them stronger. Lord, you're the one that tests the righteous, and you see the mind and the heart. Let me see your vengeance on them. Now, again, we have this same situation where we've seen earlier, where that sometimes is a little bit harsh to us, where Jeremiah says, I've been through this. They're causing me to suffer. I want to see the vengeance on them. But Lord, you do it the way you want to do it. Verse 13, sing to the Lord. So you find in verses 7 through 12, his complaint, but now also at the same time, you see in the middle of it, he still says, I'm still praising God. I'm still realizing that I'm still here because he's delivered the life of the poor from the hand of evildoers. But then he kind of goes back to complaining again, verse 14. Cursed be the day in which I was born. Let the day not be blessed in which my mother bore me. Let the man be cursed who brought news to my father, saying, a male child has been born to you. So as you keep looking at this, he rejoices for that few moments, but then he also is struggling all the way through the situation. He's stressing the idea that, and I went on a little bit further than that, but it's amazing how one moment we can be on the mountaintop, and the next moment we can be in the gloom of despair. So please forgive me for not going on here, but we go on a little bit further. We see this whole idea of, he says, let the man be cursed who brought my news to my father, saying, a male child has been born. Let that man be like the cities which the Lord overthrew and did not relent. Let him hear the cry in the morning and the shouting at noon, because he did not kill me from the womb. He says that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb also enlarged with me. Why did I come forth from the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame? There's another person in the Bible that did that kind of complaining. His name was Job. After he had gone through everything he had gone through, beginning in chapter 3 and going on from there, he preaches to his friends, and he says, I wish that I had never been born. I wish I'd never been conceived. I wish I had never seen this earth and everything in it, because my suffering is greater than anything I can bear. And so as you look at this, this is something that they often did. This is something that they were honest enough with God to say, look, God, I don't understand why we're having to go through this. Is it wrong to complain to God? Thoughts? If it is, those guys are in deep trouble, right?
Yep.
I mean, just honestly, God can handle it, but God also wants us to realize, like he had to teach Job, like he's teaching Jeremiah, you don't have all the answers. You don't know what I'm doing. And you have to trust me to do what's best. And there where the rub always is. And especially as preachers, as leaders in the church, and so forth, we've got to remember this is what, and the way we need to be, is God can hear our complaint, but God can also help us to see that we do have his revelation, but we don't know exactly everything else he's going to do. I don't know the day he's coming back. I don't know what his plans are, when it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime or another 2 or 3 or 400 years or even another 1,000. I don't know. But I know this. I've got to believe that God's going to do what's best, no matter the circumstance. And I think, again, that should be the challenge as we consider these things. Always remember God's with us. Always remember that. All right, we go a little bit further now. Chapter 21 through 25, we see God's dealing with Judah and the nations. In chapter 21 through 24, he's going to be talking about God and the kings of Judah. And then in chapter 25, he's going to talk about the judgment on all the nations. So I've given you before that king list. So as we continue to look at this is the chronology of what's going on. We might get a little bit closer to the dates of these chapters. Again, I've shared with you the idea how I wish sometimes that these things were in chronological order, but more often than not, they were not concerned about chronology as much as they were concerned with grouping like passages together. So you have here in this chronology, first you have Jehoahaz, also known as Shallum, who reigned about 609 BC, and he's going to talk about the judgment upon Shallum in 22 verses 1 through 12. And Jehoiakim, he reigned 605 BC. We're going to talk about him in chapter 25 verses 1 through 38. Jehoiakim, also known as Coniah or Jeconiah, who reigns at 598 BC, we're going to talk about him in chapter 22. And this is interesting. He starts talking about Zedekiah. Now, Zedekiah was the last king of Judah. And it's interesting, he starts off with Zedekiah and then kind of backs up to what's going on and what caused them to be punished in this respect. There's also another king that we'll be looking at right through here very briefly, and that's Pharaoh Hophra. He reigned from 589 to 570 BC. He reestablished Egypt as a world power, and Zedekiah is going to be seeking help from Egypt, and that's going to bring Nebuchadnezzar back against Judah once more to finally destroy the city and everything that's going on there. So what we're actually going to be starting to talk about in the next few chapters, chapter 21 through chapter 22, is the reign of King Zedekiah, and this is the last king that they had before they were taken into captivity. So this kind of gives us a little bit of the date. And remember, about the year 586, Nebuchadnezzar destroys the city. So it's possible that this particular passage in chapter 21 is about 588 BC, a couple of years before the final destruction of Jerusalem. So that kind of gives us that framework. The word was came to Jeremiah from the Lord when King Zedekiah sent to him Pashur the son of Malchiah and Zephaniah the son of Maaseiah the priest. Now, some people think that this Pashur in chapter 21 is the same Pashur back in chapter 20. It's not. It's two different guys. We remember he's the Pashur, the son of Immer, was the priest who was the chief governor in the house of the Lord. In chapter 21, here's the Pashur, the son of Malchiah, and Zephaniah, the son of Maaseiah, of the priest, saying, "Please inquire of the Lord for us, for Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, makes war against us." And again, why? Because he sought help from Pharaoh Hophra. So as we start looking at this, we want to know what God says about this whole situation, whether or not God's going to punish us or exactly what's going on here. What, will we be freed? And then he says, Jeremiah said, "Thus you shall say to Zedekiah, thus says the Lord God of Israel, I will turn back the weapons of war that are in your hands, with which you fight against the king of Babylon and the Chaldeans, who besiege you outside the walls, and I will assemble them in the midst of the city." So he's telling them clearly, those guys you see knocking on our doors, they're going to be in the middle of the city. And this is the end. This is the end. All right. So some people ask the question, just throw this out there for your own. We know that Babylon and the Chaldeans were the same group of people. Why? Nebuchadnezzar's father was considered a Chaldean. And so, but the Chaldeans and the Babylonians were one and the same. All right. What does he say? God says to them, verse 5, I myself will fight against you with an outstretched hand and with a strong arm, even in anger and fury and great wrath. I will strike the inhabitants of the city, both man and beast. They shall die of a great pestilence. And afterwards, I will deliver Zedekiah, king of Judah, his servants and the people, those that are left in the city, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the hand of their enemies, and into their hand of whom they seek their life. He will strike them with the edge of the sword. He shall not spare them nor have pity. God was using Babylon to punish his people. And God is saying, I'm the one punishing you. I myself, he says, will fight against you. Well, what did he use? He used the army of the Babylonians. Again, this is a wonderful thought, a thought that we should stop and consider. Sometimes we struggle with how God works. We struggle with the way God does things. We struggle with, can God use evil people? Obviously, he does. Can God use evil people to punish his people that are even more righteous than him? Yes, he does. God is in charge. He's in charge of all the kingdoms of the earth. He's in charge of everything. He can do whatever he wants to anytime he wants to. And sometimes we do need to be reminded of the reality of this situation. Mm-hmm. So, okay, somebody going to say something? Okay. So you find this situation in verses 1 through 7. He's saying, this is against Jerusalem and against you. He said, I will deliver Zedekiah, his servants, such that are left in the city. To all of these things, they shall seek their life, and he shall not spare, nor have pity or mercy. Now, we're going to see before this is all over with that Zedekiah is the last king, and the last thing that Zedekiah will see before he's taken into captivity is Nebuchadnezzar kill his sons, and then his eyes are going to be put out. These guys were vicious. I mean, they were vicious people. We start thinking about that for a few moments. So he's telling them what? He says, listen, you tell Jerusalem, you tell the leadership they're going to be punished. But then you also got to remember and realize that what? It wasn't just the kings leading them to do this, though they held their responsibility and their culpability on this, but the people themselves wanted it. Listen to what he says in verse 8. I set before you, he's saying this to the people now. He's not talking about the leadership. He said, now I'm saying this to the people. I set before you the way of life and the way of death. I'm going to punish you. You will have to be punished because of your sins. Your leaders have gotten you into this situation, and now you have followed them. So you now are going to have to deal with what's going on as a result of it. So if you're going to live or if you're going to die, it's going to be up to you. If you remain in the city, you shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. He who goes out and defects to the Chaldeans who besiege you, he shall live, and his life shall be as a prize to him. So what is God saying to them? He says, you can be alive and you can live if you surrender. But the king and his armies, what little armies he's going to have left here, because again, Egypt didn't come to their aid. And the bottom line is, he says, if you go out there and you fight, you're going to die. If you remain in this city, you're going to die by the sword, if not by the sword, by famine and by pestilence. But he who goes and defects, he said, he shall live, and he shall have his life as a prize for him. For I've set my face against this city for adversity and not for good, says the Lord. it shall be given into the hand of king of Babylon, and he shall burn it with fire. And so that's, again, the point. All right, you've got a choice. What will you do? So then you have the message to the household of David. Now, what is he talking about here? He's not talking about the king. He's talking about all of the king's servants, all of the king's, maids or guides, or his, I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for, advisors. There it is. All of his advisors. He said, hear the word of the Lord. Execute judgment in the morning, deliver him who is plundered out of the hand of the oppressor, lest my fury go forth like a fire and burn so that you quench it because of the evil of your doing. I'm against you. And so here's he's saying, house of David, you've got a choice. You need to do what's right. Execute judgment means you do exactly what I tell you to do. You delivered the one who is plundered. Part of the thing that they did, and whenever they were engaged in battles, is they would starve the people out. So you need to do what's right and help the people that are being plundered. Get them out of the hand of the oppressor. And then you, what did he just tell them earlier to the people? You go out of the city, surrender, and you can have your life. And the king, obviously, the king of Babylon will feed you on your way to Jerusalem or to Babylon. You'll have to deal with that whole situation. But he says, you have your choice now. What will you do? Life or death? What will it be? And again, that's always the situation. God is always giving his people the opportunity to choose. He emphasizes the idea that even the people in the inhabitants of the valley and the rocks, they said, who shall come down against us? We're living up here in the rocks. We're outside the city. They're not going to be bothering us. No, God says, I'm going to punish you too. We're reminded of the fact that the Edomites thought that because they dwelt in the cleft of the rocks, they would always be saved. And God punished Edom because of her sins against Israel and Judah. And God did destroy Edom as a result of that. But a lot of people could have made the point, well, we're living up here. Nebuchadnezzar can't come up here against us. So we're going to be all right. And he said, no. I'm against you, inhabitant of the valley, the rocks of the plain, as well as those that think they're going to be able to get away. I'm still going to punish you according to the fruit of your doings. You too have the right to make up your decision. Will you surrender? Or will you keep fighting? If you fight, you're going to die. If you surrender, you shall live. What will it be? And again, God says, I will punish you. This was God's punishment. Everybody could have sat back and said, well, I don't see God leading the armies of Nebuchadnezzar, but you see, God was using his Nebuchadnezzar to punish his own people. And this is the way God works and has worked for years since the beginning of governments. God has often used other governments to punish other nations. So we need to realize these things, think about these things, and meditate upon them as we think about teaching others and helping others to know this and making sure of these things ourselves. So let's stop there for a few moments, and we'll pick up there at about 7:30. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Tommy. Yeah. Wow. 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 How extensive is it? Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, you guys definitely are in our prayers. I'm telling you. I know this is, mm, wow. Wow. That's right. That's right. Well, you all are definitely in our prayers, and I'll keep emphasizing that. And y'all need anything, you let me know, okay? All right. I appreciate you too. You hang in there. All right. Bye bye. Roger, how you doing, brother?
All right, Tommy.
Good, good, good. I'm just so proud to hear that.
Taught class Sunday for the first time in a year and a half.
Ah, well, that's good.
So,
I rejoice over that.
and I told one of the members he had sat on the second row, and then he got up and moved back a little bit, so sat with somebody else. I said, I'm glad you moved because I might need to take a time just to prop myself up against that front pew there. But I was able to do it all class. So,
Well, that's great, brother. That's great. So how far did you get in your first class?
first class, all we did was talk history to the time.
Oh, okay.
History of the Jewish nation up to that time that we and it was boy, it was flying to get through that.
I know, brother. I know. I sit here and I look and I say, okay, this book has 54 chapters. Let me make sure about that before I go on. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I've got to get through all of this. And at times I want to just sit down and camp out on some of this stuff for a while.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's 52 chapters. I was pretty close anyway. And I want to camp out on this stuff for a little bit. And then at other times I feel like I'm flying so fast I can't slow down any. Another part of it is the fact that I think sometimes that when you're trying to teach it, there's so much that's kind of repetition. You don't want to just keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. But
Yeah.
it goes also back to the fact that God obviously believes in repetition because there's a lot of the stuff repeated over and over again. And it's obviously it's not a sin to repeat, right?
No, it's not, but we do get confused when it's not chronological and it's not. Yeah, half the chapter is him talking to the people, and half the chapter is him talking to God.
Yeah, you're right. And that does cause confusion too. And you've got to look at the context of all of that. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun, but it's encouraging to me. As I said before, this is one of the most encouraging books that we can keep on and hanging on and doing what we need to be doing. So that's what we need to do. So
yeah.
And I think in chapter 21, that's the thing that I'm really trying to bring out as we look in chapter 21 and so forth, is this idea that we've seen it before, but it's the idea you're going to be punished. You're going to be punished. You're going to be punished. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You know, and that's kind of where we want to pick back up where I was emphasizing again. I'll get this right. Okay. The thing I want to consider you to think about now is the idea of the last part of chapter 21, where he talks about the message to the house of David. The thing that I want to think about in this respect, again, is how this all plays out. I just kind of want to remind us about what's going on here from everything we read in Jeremiah, as well as in 2 Kings. In the fall of Jerusalem in AD 586, the final fall, Zedekiah fled the city. And before all this other stuff, he's captured and brought before Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Now, interestingly enough, you're going to find more details about this in Jeremiah 39, 4-8. Jeremiah 39, 4-8. And you have again the same thing. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem and besieged it. In the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, the city was penetrated. All the princes of the king of Babylon came in and sat by the middle gate. Nergal-Sharezer, Shamgar-Nebo, Shar-Shechem, Rabsaris, Nergal-Sharezer, Rabmag, and the rest of the princes of the king of Babylon. And all I've got to say about that is I'm glad there's not any more listed here. So it was when Zedekiah the king and saw this, they fled and went out of the city by night by way of the king's garden and by the gate between the two walls, and he went out by way of the plain. But the Chaldean army pursued them and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. They captured him. They brought him to Nebuchadnezzar, to Riblah, and the king of Babylon killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. In Riblah, the king of Babylon killed all the nobles of Judah. He put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with bronze fetters, chains, and carried him off to Babylon. They burned the king's house, the houses of the people with fire, broke down the walls of Jerusalem. And then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive to Babylon the remnant of the people who remained in the city. And those who defected to him with the rest of the people who remained, but he left a guard in the land of Judah, the poor people who had nothing, and gave them vineyards and fields at the same time. So you have this repeated 2 or 3 times. Jeremiah 52, again, you see this idea of the capture of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 52 verses 9 through 11, where again, the temple is destroyed, the city is plundered and burned. I'm not going to reread it, but it suggests to me, as you're looking at it here, as we come to chapter 21, then we see it again in 39, and then in 52, God repeats it 3 times to emphasize the destruction of the city and the reason why it was destroyed. He shows us 3 different times the sons are slain before Zedekiah, the nobles are slain, and Zedekiah is imprisoned until his death. Everything is burned down. The walls of the city are broken down. The temple's burned down. And the gold and the silver and the pillars of brass taken from the temple and carried to Babylon. And you read this in 2 Kings chapter 25, 13 through 17. So as you're looking at all of these things all together, I think he tells us the story. Then he kind of gives us some more details about what was happening up to that point in time. He tells us the story and then gives us even that much more details. And that's what's very important. And I think it's something that we need to look at, because obviously God had a reason for repeating it 4 or 5 times. Jeremiah chapter 22, he's emphasized the idea, thus says the Lord, go down to the house of the king of Judah and there speak this word. And if you look at this again, Jeremiah 22 verses 1 through 9 is talking about Zedekiah, Jehoiahaz, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim. Now, this is backwards to us. That is not the chronological order. And what God is doing as you read this section, here's the last king, here was the king before him, and the king before him, and then the king before him. And the reason why he think he's going backwards is he's saying, okay, Zedekiah is just following the same path of Jehoiahaz, of Jehoiakim, of Jehoiakim. And none of these men try to do what's right. The last good king that Judah had was Josiah. And these are some of Josiah's sons. A couple of them are some of Josiah's sons. They did not follow in their father's footsteps. But Josiah was the last good king. And he says, I want you to understand this is what you need to do. And that's what he's going to do here in chapter 22. So in the first chapter 22, verses 1 through 9, he's stressing the idea, go speak to the king of Judah and there speak this word. Hear the words of the Lord, you who sit on the throne of David, you and your servants and your people who enter these gates, execute judgment and righteousness. So again, Jeremiah is preaching and emphasizing this is what will save you. This is what will allow you to continue to serve as king. This is what you need to do. Execute judgment and righteousness. Righteousness, again, is just simply right living. And deliver the plundered out of the hand of the oppressor. Do no wrong or do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. And again, how often do we see this repeated in scripture time and time again? We've already seen it in Jeremiah 21. We've seen it in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 6. God wants them to dispense justice. He wants them to take care of the widows, the fatherless. He wants them to defend the innocent. All of these things come into play. And he says, if you do this thing, Zedekiah, you shall enter the gates of this house, riding on horses and chariots, accompanied by servants, kings who sit on the throne of David. But if you will not, this house shall become a desolation. There's the warning. This is what you need to do. And so he's telling them this: you are Gilead to me, the head of Lebanon. I will make you a wilderness, cities that are not inhabited, prepare destroyers against you. They shall cut down your choice cedars and cast them into the fire. Many nations will pass by and says, why has the Lord done this to this great city? Because they have forsaken the covenant of their God and worshiped other gods and served them. So there's the warning. King, repent, do what you need to do what's right. God can make the same message to us today as a nation, as a people, as the church. He can make the very same points. He will say to them, well, why does punishment come? Because you're not taking care of the people that need to be taken care of. You have become corrupt. You're not obeying my commandments. You're not doing what's right. And so he says, they have forsaken the covenant. Verse 10 kind of is a transition verse. Weep not for the dead, nor bemoan him. Weep bitterly for him who goes away, for he shall return no more, nor see his native country. So Jeremiah, by inspiration, is saying there's no need to crying for the dead people. Now all you need to be crying for the people that's being taken into captivity. And they're going to be there for 70 years. And most of the majority of the people that are taken out of the land to Babylonian captivity, they will not make it. I mean, they're going to die in that 70 years. It's going to be the next generation. Now, think about that idea from the book of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, where God demanded that the children of Israel obey him, but the children of Israel, by and large, did not obey him. And so it was the next generation that obeyed God and drove the Canaanites out of the land of Canaan, and they then partook it. Why? The first generation did not have enough faith. I see this pattern going on over and over and over again. And to me, it speaks volumes to us that are older. Our faith needs to be handed down to our children. But do we have enough faith to hand that on down to our children? What will happen to our children? Will they see the lives that we led and say, okay, I don't need to put God first. I could put him second or third or fourth down the list, whatever it comes down the line. Will we be held accountable because we didn't bring our children up to know this? Will there be a time where God says the next generation will receive the blessings because this generation is unworthy? Well, it happened before, and here Jeremiah is talking about the very same thing happening all over again. So he's warning him there. Now he goes on, verse 11. He says, the Lord concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah. Shallum is another name for Jehoahaz, all right? And Shallum was the son of Josiah, who reigned instead of Josiah's father, who went from his place. He shall not return here anymore. He shall die in the place where they have carried him captive. So Josiah dies. His son rules, Jehoahaz. But what happens? Well, Jehoahaz is taken to captivity, and he does not return back. He does not come back home. And so he says, he shall die in the place where they've led him captive. He shall see this land no more. Now, again, here, verse 13, here's the reason. Here's something to think about. Here's something to meditate on. Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness and his chambers by injustice, who uses his neighbor's service without wages and gives him nothing for his work, who says, I will build myself a wide house with spacious chambers and cut out windows for it, paneling it with cedar and painting it with vermilion. So it seems like Josiah was the last good king Judah had. His children, they didn't follow in his footsteps. And it seems like as you're reading Jeremiah's account, that the reason why Jehoahaz is because he was building his house by unrighteousness. He wasn't going the way of his father. He was using the taxes, I guess you might say, and not really helping the people that were in need. And what was he doing? He was building a big house for himself, cutting out windows for it, painting it with vermilion. He said, God asked the question, Should you reign because you enclose yourself in cedar? Okay. He says, did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? He judged the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. Was this not, or was not this knowing me? So he says, you're closing yourself in this big house of cedar. And he says, it was well with him, but think about your dad. He did what was right. That your eyes and your heart are for nothing but covetousness, shedding innocent blood, practicing oppression and violence. Ezekiel 18 talks about the fact that the son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, nor shall the father bear the iniquity of the son. Even though a man may be a good Christian man and hopefully would bring his children up to do what's right, at the same time, we cannot be held accountable for what our children decide to do after we're gone. They're going to be held accountable. And we need to stress that to our children. Look, you're going to be held accountable for your life, not me. I'm going to be held accountable for the way I brought you up and the way I reared you. And I tried to rear you in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But, at the end of time, whenever you're facing God on Judgment Day, it's going to be you and God. It's going to be you and God. And we need to stress that idea to them. And we need to, as leaders in the church, we need to be stressing that to our parents, that they're bringing up faithful children in the Lord. We need to be stressing it to the children. Even, those little children, you need to be a Christian. You need to serve the Lord with your heart. You need to give him what he deserves. Okay. So now you have Josiah. Now you have Shallum, who was also known as Jehoiahaz. Now you have chapter 22, verse 18. That should be not 13. It should be 18. Okay. And in fact, Jehoiahaz should be verses 10 through verse 17. So I've got to correct that. So make your correction if your notes, okay? He says, thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. So you had Shallum that reigned for a certain period of time. He died. His brother took his place. And he says this about Jehoiakim. They shall not lament for him, saying, alas, my brother, alas, my sister. And they shall not lament for him, saying, alas, master, alas, his glory. He shall be buried with the burial of a donkey, dragged and cast out beyond the great gates of Jerusalem. All right, now think about that. Buried with the burial of a donkey, dragged and cast out. So this man did not try to do what was right. He was obviously killed and taken out and just buried. And so what was he trying to do? He was trying to make alliances. Like so many others before him, he was trying to make alliances. Go to Lebanon, cry out, lift up your voice, cry from Abiram, for all your lovers are destroyed. If we just get the right guys to go in with us and fight with us together in this in this war, we're going to be all right. He said, I spoke to your prosperity, but you said, I will not hear. This has been your manner from your youth. Have you ever seen a stubborn child? we all have. Maybe we've had one or two, and it's just like, I'm not going to listen. I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. I'm going to do it the way I want to do. He said, you did not obey my voice. The wind shall eat up your rulers, or the shepherds, and your lovers shall go into captivity. Surely then you will be ashamed and humiliated, O inhabitants for all your wickedness, inhabitants of Lebanon. And he said, make your nest in the cedars. How gracious will you be when the pangs come upon you like the pain of a woman? So here's again, don't even cry for him, because he's not even trying to do what's right. He gives the ideal of Shallum. He says, return from your ways, but you're not paying attention to the needs of the people as much as you're worried about building your house. And so then beginning in verse 24, he then starts talking about Coniah, who's also known as Jehoiakim. He says, Coniah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were the signet on my right hand, yet I would pluck you off. I will give your hand into those who seek your life, into the hand of those whose face you fear, the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. I will cast you out and your mother who bore you into another country, and there you shall die. But to the land to which they desire to return, they shall not return. You're going to be held in captivity. That's it. So as you look at this, is this man Coniah a despised broken idol? A vessel, he says, in which there is no pleasure? Why are they cast out? O earth, 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 hear the words of the Lord. Write this man down as childless, a man who shall not prosper in his days, and none of his descendants shall prosper, sitting on the throne of David and ruling anymore in Judah. So that's what was going on with them. And this is these kings. This message beginning actually chapter 21 and going through this chapter 22 is mainly talking about these kings and why they were going to be punished and what was going on in their lives that caused them to be facing this punishment. Now, you have in chapter 23, and we're going to take a little bit more time going through this passage than we do this from others, but here you have a messianic prophecy. And he starts off by emphasizing the idea, and to me, it fits with everything that's going on in chapter 22, where he's talked about these kings who should have been acting as shepherds over the people. And so he's given us example to the sons of Josiah, Shallum, Jehoiakim, Coniah, so forth. He's given us examples of the wrong way to do it. And so you might say, in essence, chapter 23, verse 1 could be a conclusion of chapter 22. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says the Lord. That's an extremely interesting idea. So he says, you are the shepherds. You are supposed to take care of my sheep. Your leadership makes the difference. And here you have that stressing, that idea of their leadership wasn't what it was supposed to be. Here's what they've done. You say to the Lord God of Israel against the shepherds who feed my people, you have scattered my flock. Could he be talking about the kings? Yeah, obviously, because they led the people away into idolatry. Could he be talking about the priest? Obviously, because they're going to go in line with what the king says. Could he have been talking about the false prophets? Yes, because they are preaching a message that the people want to hear, not the message the people need to hear. We find time and again in scripture the idea that shepherds are going to be held to a higher accounting because of what or how they lead the people. So here's that passage that stresses that. You'll find the same idea in the book of Ezekiel, where God gives a command concerning the shepherds there. I just went blank as to where it was, but I'll look for it in our next break and I'll definitely find it. But there was a passage in Ezekiel where he warns the shepherds, as well as you find these small glimpses over and over and over again. Now, what was the shepherds who were what were their job? They were supposed to be feeding his people. Instead, he said, you scattered my flock. Could this apply to leaders in the church today? I think it should. I think we've got to look at the warning. We don't need to be scattering the flock. But the flock sometimes is going to be scattered because there are going to be some sheep that want their way above everything else. The flock is going to be scattered because they are not worried or concerned about other sheep. They are just concerned about themselves. Again, Jeremiah will talk about those sheep that muddy the waters, that tramp down the grass, that do not allow the other sheep to eat so that they might be nourished as well. And in a biblical sense, in the church sense, we see that a lot of times in churches. There are those that are bullies. I don't know any other way to say it than that. They don't care about anybody but themselves. They want and desire their way above everything else. And shepherds have a responsibility to lead the flock and, discipline those sheep that are leading others astray, that are trying to lord it over their flock. Paul will emphasize the idea that in 1 Timothy, whenever he gives the commands of the qualifications of elders, as well as Titus chapter 1, 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1, that they are not to be lords over their flock. And that's always been an interesting idea. Think about the idea that elders are to lead the flock, but they're not to lord over the flock, in that they are not to act like, well, I'm the only one that's got all the answers, and you need to follow me just because I say so. I've met a couple of elders like that in my life. Well, I'm an elder and you got to do what I say. There's truth to that statement, but what if the elder is trying to lead the flock astray? Obviously, that man should not be in that situation. Here was again a nation. So you have the priests, the prophets, and the kings leading their people away. He says, you have scattered my flock. You have driven them away. Obviously, the good sheep that might be trying to do what's right. And he says, you have not attended to them. You have not watched over them. You're not making sure that they're getting fed right. You're not making sure that they're protected from the wolves. You're not making sure that they are protected from other sheep. And he says, God says to them, he says, you've not attended them. I attend to you for the evil of your doing, says the Lord. As a shepherd, as a preacher, sometimes some people are easy to work with. Other people are not. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just being as honest as I can be about it. Other people are not. Okay. And that's what it is. And the thing is he says, and sometimes we as shepherds, as elders of the church, we like to deal with those sweet-spirited Christians that are trying their best to be the Christians they need to be, but we a lot of times don't go after the ones that are creating the problems. We don't try to rebuke them. We don't try to, in love, again, I'm stressing this is a way, in love, we've got to do what we can to help them to stay faithful to the Lord and do what the Lord wants them to do as well. We've got to be concerned about them. He says, God says this, I will gather the remnant of my flock. I'm always challenged by that statement and the fact that this is God's flock. God is the one who adds people to the church. I don't. You don't. We don't vote people into the church. I know some denominations do, but we don't. That is between them and God. And once they have been obedient to the gospel, they become a part of his flock. And God says, I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries that I have driven them. What if they had good kings? What if these kings had not sought to make alliances with other kingdoms to fight a threat, but instead trusted in God? What if the priest had encouraged the kings to do what was right? What if? We can always ask those questions. Mm-hmm. But history always tells us what does happen when things don't or are not followed the way that God wants it to be followed. God does say, I'm going to bring them back. And then what? I will set up shepherds who will feed them, and they shall fear no more, nor be dismayed, nor shall they be lacking. I've not raised sheep. Sheep are skittish animals from everything I've read about. And the thing that I want you to consider is the fact that they have to be protected. They have to, if they're going to eat, they have to know that they are going to be, they don't have to be worried about a wolf or something coming down the line. They know that they're going to be protected. There are some sheep now that are afraid. Amen. I mean, the COVID and all that other stuff. And so there's that going on. We as shepherds need to really sit down and do a lot of study about this. Our main job is not to be concerned about what's best for us, but what's best for the flock. That's always the main concern. And more importantly, even than that, is to make sure that the flock is following God in the way that they need to, and they need to see in us us doing what we are asking them to do. And that's, to me, is, I've met some people, well, you do what I say, not what I do. No. The thing about Jesus is when he lived upon this earth, he showed it, he preached it, he showed it. And that's what we are challenged to do. That's what we must do as well. So as we consider these things for just a few moments, we again realize the idea that these are the responsibilities. He says they will feed them. We are to bring it to a situation where they're not going to be afraid anymore, nor be dismayed, nor shall they be lacking, says the Lord. And here he talks about the shepherd. Now, John chapter 10, I think, comes into play here. The days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. And this is his name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. Behold, the days are coming that they shall no longer say, as the Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives, who brought up and led the descendants of the house of Israel from the north country and from all the countries where I have driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. Jeremiah is mainly preaching to the people of Judah. Israel had been taken into Assyrian captivity, but he's also emphasizing the idea here. And this is, again, is a beautiful, beautiful thought. He's stressing the idea here that I'm not only going to bring Judah back, but I'm going to bring Israel back as well. They too, all of them are going to be saved. And it's kind of like it's bringing them back together. Okay, how's all this going to happen? I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. And notice what this king is going to do. And again, obviously, this is a messianic prophecy. He shall reign and prosper. Jesus is reigning as king over his kingdom right now. And he always has. And that's something that should encourage us and lift us up, and something that we need to rejoice in. He is that branch. He is reigning. He is prospering. He will execute judgment. One way to put the idea is he's justice. He's going to judge. We're reminded of the fact that whenever the Lord comes again, he stresses the idea that I will judge. He's going to be the one that makes the judgment calls on all of these things. So he says, and he will bring or execute righteousness in the earth. He's going to do justice in the earth. And in his days, Judah will be saved. Israel shall dwell safely. Who are Israel? Who are Judah? Once we've been baptized into Christ, we become a part of his kingdom. That's where we talk about salvation. At that same moment in time, we become citizens of his kingdom. And this is the reason why he's called the Lord our righteousness. Under the Old Testament law, they had to try to keep the law perfectly. They couldn't. They failed. They weren't able to because it was just overwhelming in that respect. One of the things the Bible does stress is we can't save ourselves. We can't do enough good works by ourselves. That's why we need Christ. That's why we need his blood. That's why we trust in him and not in ourselves. As we live our lives day to day, we get up in the morning and maybe read scripture or start off with a prayer and say, you know what, today, Lord, I'm going to give you my very best. And life comes in and things happen and we get into disagreements with folks and we struggle with this and we struggle with that. And before the day is over, we're just as tired as we were the night before. And we look back over at our life from that day, from this day, and say, okay, what did I do to bring glory to God today? Could I have handled this situation differently with a brother or sister in Christ? And maybe instead of driving them away, could I have done something to heal the problems, to stop the difficulties? You know, there's just so much there that comes into play as I look at this thing. The Lord is our righteousness. And again, the Hebrew, this is a Yahweh, the word for God. Zekunu, which suggests again the idea of he is the one that is our righteousness. And so he says it's not going to be about me bringing the children of Israel up out of Egypt, but it's going to be about me bringing God's people, his descendants, out of all the land of captivities, and they shall dwell in their own land. Well, here you have again this break in verse 9. And what happens in verse 9? Jeremiah's talking about some things. My heart within me is broken because of the prophets. All my bones shake. I'm like a drunken man, like a man whose wine is overcome because of the Lord. Because of his holy words, the land is full of adulterers. Because of a curse, the land mourns. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up. Their course of life is evil, and their might is not right. So here, I think in verses 9 and 10, Jeremiah is stressing how he feels. It could very well could be talking about God, but I think he's talking specifically about himself, because in verse 11 and following, he then emphasizes again, here's what the Lord says. So here you have this interjection by Jeremiah. And notice his heart is broken because of these false prophets that everybody is listening to rather than hearing the word of the Lord. Do we get upset when we hear false prophets? Do we sometimes dismiss them? Do we warn people about the false prophets that are out there? Jeremiah tried, but obviously they didn't listen. And here he's just saying, again, I think this is part of the reason why God chose Jeremiah. He had the heart of God. His heart is broken. And he says, I'm like a man whose wine is overcome because of the Lord, because of his words. I know that I have imbibed his words. I know what's going to happen to this people. I know how they're all going to be punished. I have just prophesied about these 4 kings and what they were going to happen because of this. And they're not listening. And he said, the land is just full of adulterers. Is that adultery an actual adultery? Well, probably, because probably some of the idols that they were worshiping engaged or asked their followers to engage in that. But could it also be adulterers from the viewpoint that they're not faithful to God? The land is not faithful to God. They're not faithful, so they're full of adulterers. And the land mourns. We've talked about a famine. We've talked about drought as we've gone through this book up till now. The land mourns. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up, and their might is not right. And for both the prophet and priest are profane. Yes, in my house I have found their wickedness. Now, that's an interesting idea. I think I mentioned this before, but Ezekiel will reference the fact that he is taken back in the spirit from Babylon back to Jerusalem before the destruction of the temple. And he actually finds idolatry going on in the temple itself. So he says, prophet and priest are profane. In my house, I have found their wickedness, God says. So their ways shall be slippery. In the darkness, they shall be driven on and fall in them, and I will bring disaster on them the year of their punishment. I've seen folly in the prophets of Samaria, Samaria being the capital of the 10 northern tribes. They prophesied by Baal and caused my people Israel to err. I've seen a horrible thing in the prophets of Jerusalem. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen the hands of evildoers. No one turns back from his wickedness. All of them are like Sodom to me, and her inhabitants like Gomorrah. So Jeremiah's heart is broken. God says, Jeremiah, I understand your heart is broken and the lies that you're hearing. But he says, I have to punish them because even in my own house, I found this wickedness. And just like their sister before them, they've caused my people Israel to err. In Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel compares the two sisters, Israel and Judah. And he compares them to two sisters. And he says, you know what? You trusted in your beauty. And he talks about the idea. He says, I want Jerusalem to know her sins. And he says, your sister, the 10 northern tribes, engaged, but they said, you didn't even look at your own sister, the 10 northern tribes, and see what happened to them. You haven't learned nothing from them. And now you're going through and even sinning that much more against me because you trusted in your beauty. Ezekiel chapter 16:15. You played the harlot because of your fame, poured out your harlotry on everyone passing by who would have it. You took some of your garments and adorned multicolored high places for yourselves. You've taken your beautiful jewelry from my gold, my silver, and made male images and played the harlot with them. I read through this and I think about the children of Israel doing this. And again, I think about the idea that our world today is doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Politics, like I said, TV, idols, we can go on and on and on and on and on. We idolize everything. We may not actually fall down and kill animals to sacrifice to these, but this is exactly what's going on. That's what they're doing. And God says, I'm tired of it then. He's still tired of it today. They're like Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 15, I feed them with wormwood. I'll make them drink the water of gall. From the prophets of Jerusalem, profaneness has gone out into the land. So thus says the Lord. He's trying to warn them. And again, Jeremiah is speaking the message. Don't listen to the words of the prophets who prophesy to you. They make you worthless. They speak a vision of their own heart. And they continue to say to those who despise me, the Lord has said, you shall have peace. And to everyone who walks according to the dictates of his own evil heart, no evil shall come upon you. Isn't that amazing? And we've kind of seen this ideal earlier in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 17. Again, you see the stubbornness where they're continuing to preach, well, everything's going to be peace. Everything's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be all right. There are always going to be those that's always going to say everything's going to be fine when judgment is coming. He asked the question, verse 18, who has stood in the counsel of the Lord? Who has perceived his word? Who has marked his word? A whirlwind of the Lord has gone forth in fury, a violent whirlwind. It shall fall violently on the head of the wicked. The anger of the Lord will not turn back until he's executed and performed the thoughts of his heart. In the latter days, you will understand it perfectly. But what's sad about it, in the latter days, whenever they've seen the final judgment, they're not going to like that. God says, I've not sent these prophets. They ran. If they stood in my counsel, they've caused people to hear my words, they would have turned away from their evil way and the evil of their doing, but they did not stand in God's counsel. They're coming up with their own message. The false prophets are still among us today. They're still telling us everything is going to be okay. You've got to follow my way of doing things. You've got to do what I'm encouraging you to do. This is what the Lord told me to tell you. The Lord laid this on my heart. On and on and on and on it goes. He says, am I a God near at hand, says the Lord, and not a God afar off? Can anyone hide himself in secret places so I shall not see him? Do I not feel heaven and earth? Says the Lord. I know what's going on. I know what you're doing. You can't hide from me. And again, this is, as I've stressed all through this book, and I think Jeremiah continues to stress it. Why does Jeremiah continue to stress it? Because of the fact we all need to be reminded, God, we can't hide anything from God. We need to tell that to folks. We need to be honest. Look, folks, listen, you're going to be before the God of heaven and earth. He knows everything about you. He knows when you were born. He knows when you're going. He knows everything. And we've seen this already. So he said, I have dreamed. How long will this be in the heart of the prophets who prophesy lie? They're prophesying the prophets, the deceit of their own heart, who make my people forget my name by their dreams, as everyone tells another. And so he says, the prophet who has a dream, let him tell a dream. He who has my word, let him speak my word faithfully. Is not my word like a fire and like a hammer that breaks the rock to pieces? That'll preach right there, I'm telling you.
Mhm.
His word is the fire. His word burns off the chaff. His word tells the truth. His word breaks down what we try to build on our own words. And so he says, I'm against the prophets who steal my words, everyone from his neighbor. I'm against the prophet who uses their tongue and say, he says. I'm against those who prophesy false dreams and tell them and cause my people to err by their lies and by their recklessness. I did not send them. I did not command them. Therefore, they shall not profit this people at all. There's always going to be somebody out there telling us what we want to hear, telling us everything's going to be all right, telling us this is the way you need to go. And what I want to do and what I'm going to make sure I'm doing is following the word of the Lord. And he says, some people say, what is the oracle of the Lord? You shall say to them, what oracle? I will forsake you. You shall say, everyone shall say to his neighbor, what has the Lord answered? What has the Lord spoken? And the oracle of the Lord you shall mention no more, for every man's words will be his oracle. They have perverted the words of the living God, the Lord of hosts, our God. So the problems of the false prophets that we have today, the false teachers we have today, is nothing new. It's been going on since the beginning of time. Satan is getting those false prophets, those false teachers out there teaching all the time as a opposition to what God has said in his word. And they kept saying, well, the oracle of the Lord. He said, the oracle of the Lord. He said, don't even listen. And he said, I'm going to forget you and forsake you. And the city that I gave you will be cast out of my presence, and I'll bring an everlasting reproach upon you and a perpetual shame which shall not be forgotten. They're listening to the wrong people.
Yep.
Oh God, help me to make sure that when I preach your word, I'm preaching your word, that I'm not getting it wrong, that it's not something that I want to say because I've come up with some new novel interpretation of it. Lord, I want to speak your word because that's the only thing that's going to save. So, questions or comments up till now? Okay. We're going to go through chapter 24 and we're going to stop tonight, okay? Chapter 24 is only 10 verses. And again, much like we started off tonight with the situation with the potter and the clay and the sign of the broken flask back in chapter 19, you have another sign here, another visible signal, another visible sign that Jeremiah is going to see. So he saw 2 baskets of figs set before the temple of the Lord after Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah. So this would have been, I think this would have been in 5. Make sure about that. I've got to go back and check the dates on that before I say this for sure. I'm wanting to say this would have been the second carrying away, which would have been about 597. Okay. It could have been the first one, but I'll check and make sure on that. One basket had very good figs, like the figs that are first ripe, and the other basket had very bad figs, which could not be eaten. And so he says, Jeremiah, what do you see? He said, figs, the good figs, very good. The bad, the very bad, cannot be eaten. They are so bad. He says, thus says the Lord, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge those who carried away captive from Judah, whom I've sent out of this place for their own good. Now, notice God, in the first 2 carryings away, the first one, 605 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar came the first time, Daniel was part of that. The second one would have included Ezekiel. He said, I sent them away for good, for good. I will acknowledge them, for I did this for their own good into the land of the Chaldeans. I think what God did is he chose the best he could, and he sent them to be taken care of in Babylon. And the rest of them that's going to be left there is going to be the worst of the flock, the worst of everybody. And that's the ones that he finally destroys. Though there's going to be even a third carrying away. But obviously by that third time, there are not as many, and they're more wicked, I guess you'd say. They're more in line with probably sinning than the others were. God says, the ones that I have sent away already, those are the good figs. They are the ones that I'm going to bring back. They are the ones that are whose children I'm going to allow to come back and rebuild this place. And he said, I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them back to this land. So it's not so much that they're bragging about how God delivered them from Egyptian bondage, but now it's how God brought them back out of Babylonian captivity. I will build them up and not pull them down. I will plant them and not pluck them up. And I will give them a heart to know me. There again is that passage that stressed the idea that God is the one who gives the heart, and God is the one who helps us to understand what we need to be doing. I am the Lord. They shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. Their whole heart. That's what God is wanting. When we started studying this book, it was all about the heart, right?
Yep.
And it still is, as God is saying. And so these people I'm bringing back, it's their hearts. They're going to return to me with their whole hearts. Well, what about the bad figs? He said, I will give up Zedekiah, the king of Judah, his princes, the residue of Jerusalem who remain in this land, and those who dwell in the land of Egypt. And I will deliver them to trouble and to all the kingdoms of the earth for their harm, to be a reproach, a byword, a taunt, and a curse in the places where I shall drive them. And I'll send the sword, the famine, the pestilence, till they are consumed from the land that I give to their fathers. So, which basket should they have been in? That's the question. And he saved the worst till the last. He says, Zedekiah, I'll give up Zedekiah, the king of Judah, his princes, the residue, and they shall be the reproach, a byword, a taunt, a curse. They shall be punished. All right. Questions or comments?
Oh, sir.
Clear as mud. All right, let's stop there tonight. I know I'm not giving you the full 2.5 hours. I apologize about that, but I'll make up for it sometime. Okay.
All right.
Extra notes or something somewhere down the line.
All right.
Sounds good.
Do what?
I said, sounds good.
Okay. I appreciate you guys so much. You're an encouragement to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And hope you all have a good week. I'm praying for you, Roger, as you're teaching this class.
Thank
Hang
you,
in there with
Tommy.
it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, you've got an hour, and I'm trying to go 2.5 hours. And I'm trying to cover a lot of ground real quick. So sometimes I feel like I'm driving to Texas at 80 miles an hour on I-20, and you just barely see the sights. And every once in a while, I get into Birmingham or Jackson, Mississippi, and I have to slow down because there's some things you really need to look at here. So that's the way I'm handling it. And if there's a way I can be better at it, let me know. Okay.
All right.
I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you.
All right.
God willing, I'll see you next Tuesday. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, brother. Bye.